Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Welcome to the second day of rest of district rezoning proposals. I think everybody, maybe we'll just do a quick round of introductions again, if that's okay with everybody, just very quickly. My name's Phil Mitchell. I'm chairing the Hearings Independent Hearing Commission. If the panel can do likewise, and then if we could just quickly go around the room, please.
Good morning, I'm Janet Gibb, Independent Commissioner in Waikato District Council, current councillor.
Good morning, I'm Jan Sedgwick. I'm a councillor on the Waikato District Council, appointed as an Independent Hearing Commissioner.
Good morning, I'm Dines Fulton. I'm an Independent Commissioner, but a former Waikato District Councillor.
Morning, Nakoto, Will Mark, Independent Commissioner.
Paul Cooney, Deputy Chair, Independent Commissioner and lawyer.
That's us.
Good morning, it's Lee from CKL, and I'll go around the room to my right.
Pravinda Kaur, Counsel for J&T Quigley Limited.
Thank you.
Joan Forrett, Counsel for McDonald, Diamond Creek Farms and Horatu Farms, which are in this afternoon session.
Thank you.
And to the left,
Jonathan Quigley, Director of J&T Quigley Limited.
Morning, Mr. Quigley.
Tricia Simonson from Ormiston Associates, on-site wastewater specialist.
Thank you.
Dave Miller with AgFirst, Farm Management Consultant.
Thanks, everybody.
And up the front, you might not be able to see Ian Boyle.
Yeah.
Oh no, there he is. I just saw it. We just caught a glimpse.
Yep, I'm hiding.
All right, thanks, everybody. We just carry on. There's a couple other people here I think that's useful to introduce, including the Section 42A report authors.
I'm Susanna Tate. I authored the Section 42A report for the Hamilton Fringe.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Catherine Bolton. I'm the Section 42A author for the rest of district.
Thank you both.
Morning, all. Fitcher Bell here, District Plan Administrator and Hearings Coordinator for Waikato District Council. Thanks.
Morning, Sandra Kelly, Senior Project Coordinator, District Plan.
Morena Koto, I'm Carolyn Ray, Assistant Counsel.
Good morning, everyone. Bevan Holbrook, planning witness for Diamond Creek Farms this afternoon.
Thanks, Mr. Holbrook. I think we've got Mr. Rob, who is trying to stay incognito, but we can see his name. So, and you're speaking this afternoon, Mr. Rob. Are you there, Mr. Rob? We'll assume you are, but oh, there we go. You've just turned your microphone on. Still can't hear you though. I think we'll leave it for now, and between now and this afternoon, maybe just see if you can get your microphone working. Actually, he's logged off, I think, isn't he?
Yeah.
There's also somebody from the council that says connecting to audio, but I think we can leave that for now and kick off. So we're due to hear from J&T Quigley Limited first and foremost. So over to presentation, I presume, of the legal submissions first, followed by the evidence.
Yes, sir. Morning, everyone. Again, so J&T Quigley Limited has made a submission in relation to its site at 25 Tamahiri Drive. That site be rezoned to either country living or village zone. However, following the Section 42A framework report, the submitter has decided to focus on rezoning its site as village zone to ensure efficient use of the urban land resource. In our submission, the rezoning of this site will allow for a greater number of people to live close to a center zone with existing community services and commercial activities, as the site is right opposite the heavily developed area that is Tamaheri Country Club. We understand that Tamaheri Country Club is expanding. Tamaheri Village is in close proximity, about 800 meters from the site. There is a regional bus stop within 200 meters. 500 meters is Tamaheri School. There is also now a cycleway connection to both Hamilton and Cambridge. That cycleway passes opposite the site on Tamaheri Drive. It is also submitted that rural zoning of the subject site in the proposed plan fails to achieve the requirements of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, especially as the surrounding area is urbanized. As the panel would be aware, the NPSUD is one of the documents that need to be considered when preparing the proposed plan. The National Policy Statement requires Council to remove overly restrictive rules that affect urban development outcomes, including notifying plan changes, implementing intensification policies. The district plan review process is therefore an ideal time to give effect to the National Policy Statement. It is submitted that the National Policy Statement is of critical importance to the requested rezoning. The rezoning proposal consolidates residential growth around an existing urbanized settlement and consistent with a number of objectives and policies of the National Policy Statement. In respect of the Waikato Regional Policy Statement, Policy 6.1.14 of the RPS seeks to ensure that new development within the sub-region adopts the future-proof land use pattern. Clauses C and G of Policy 6.14 create flexibility for land use to depart from the future-proof pattern, provided that certain criteria and principles are met. For completeness, we also note that the proposal aligns with the principles in Section 6A of the WRPS, as the rezoning will support existing urban areas, as the site is located within Hamilton urban area and is consistent with the direction for urban development. It will occur in a manner that provides clear delineation between urban areas and rural areas. And we also note that to the south of the site, there is proposed southern links. It will promote a compact urban form, design, and location around an existing urbanized area. And site is not located near any significant mineral resources, natural hazard areas, energy transmissions corridors, or regionally significant industry. The Section 42A report notes that Hamilton City Council is the key submitter, opposing the majority of submissions to rezone in Tamaheri. We note the further submission from Hamilton City Council had been overlooked in Mr. Shaw's rebuttal evidence. The opposition from Hamilton City Council is based on cross-boundary impacts that further subdivision is likely to have on the infrastructure within Hamilton, namely transport, three waters, and social infrastructure. It further says that the key purpose of the rural zone is to protect the productive nature of the land and to ensure non-rural activities are more appropriately directed to towns and other areas identified for growth. In my submissions, the opposition fails to note that the subject site is located within the urban limits and is consistent with the direction of future-proof for urban development. The site is not being used for rural activities at present, as an early childcare center operates from the site, and therefore the key purpose of the rural zone is not being achieved in any event. There is nothing rural about this site. On the contrary, the proposal is consistent with the needs of the area. The only other further submission was from Mercury NZ in opposition. It is noted that Mercury NZ has opposed several submissions due to the potential for flood hazard risks in areas proposed to be intensified. It is submitted that the subject site is not subject to the potential hazard risk identified by Mercury. In our submission, the rezoning this land is the most appropriate way to achieve the relevant strategic objectives of the proposed plan. And the rezoning proposal would not constitute to unplanned or uncoordinated growth. Those are my submissions, and I'm happy to answer any questions, or I can forward it to Mr. Lee Shaw for further planning evidence.
Thank you, Ms. Kaur. Let's hear from Mr. Shaw, and then we'll see if we've got any questions of either of you. Then we'll get the full picture, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Fletcher, are you able to put the highlights package up on the screen? Thank you for that. Yes, we can go to the next page. Yeah, so when I was contacted by Jonathan about rezoning this property, I initially was sceptical. And it wasn't until I actually went out to the site where I could see merits in his proposal. Now, with the current rural zone provisions, it would be a prohibited activity to apply for what we could potentially do on the property. We can see that the area is heavily modified. I visited the site recently, and the Tamahiri Country Club are continuing to build their individual dwellings directly opposite the subject site's childcare centre, as proposed to be some two-storey dwellings, duplexes. And also opposite the existing cottage is going to be a dementia care unit, which we believe is two-storey as well. So the site's already heavily, or the surrounding area is heavily modified to be urbanised, and is going to be more so close to the subject site with two-storey development directly across the road. And of course we have the childcare centre on the site. So it's clearly not being used for a rural activity. And on its merits, I would have no concern putting together an application and lodging it to council to support a proposed subdivision. However, I can't apply as it's a prohibited activity. Can we go to the next page, please? So, yeah, we've looked at, what we could do on the property, managing the effects. A full assessment would be required, but we think we've addressed all the site constraints, would be able to manage the effects, and we just do not see that the land can be used for any rural activity. It seems crazy that the underlying zoning is to remain rural when that purpose isn't currently and cannot possibly be achieved on that site. Minimal infrastructure is required to develop the land because we're going to deal with that on site. We would like water connections, which we believe would be available to us with contributions, but if need be, we could do water tanks as well, but everything else can be managed on sites. And yeah, we would like the opportunity to be able to at least apply for an application such as this with the council rather than it being prohibited. So the easiest outcome would be to rezone it to a village zone and provide provisions that would enable what we're proposing. There are alternative options where we could lodge it as a non-complying application under the rural zone if the rural provisions changed. But we do think this is an urbanised area. This is a unique property. It's not connected to any other rural land. And yeah, we would like to think the commissioners could support our proposal. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mr. Shaw. I think that's fairly clear. Let's see if there's any questions of you or Ms. Kaur. Mr. Marg?
No, thank you, but nothing from me.
Ms. Gibb?
Yes, I just would like to know from someone, the area on the right-hand side of the subject site, it's got lots of trees on it. There's a bit of crown land, but what actually is in that area? I guess you call it the southern side?
Yeah, It is Crown land. It is vegetation, basically. I think it's identified as a potential significant natural area, although those trees along your boundary are deciduous, aren't they?
Correct, yes. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a low-lying. Is there a drain through there?
Yeah, I think there's a drain through there, and my understanding is when the expressway was built and Tamahiri Drive stopped being State Highway 1, that became landlocked by us essentially, and hence the paper road. But it's mostly just privet and general vegetation that is left to its own device.
Right, so that whole vegetation area is Crown land?
Not the whole area,
no.
But the area immediately adjoining our property is. So we have no physical connection to any other rural zone, well, sorry, any other privately owned land. I am not entirely sure who owns that parcel there. The one closest to the road is privately owned, but there's a 10 or 20 metre separation, sorry, closest to Tamahiri Drive. The one to the left, that one's privately owned. And I can't recall off the top of my head who owns the larger one next to the state highway. I know the slither of land is Crown.
Okay. All right, just giving me a bigger picture. Thanks very much.
Yep.
Thank you. Ms. Cedric?
Yes, just actually carrying on on that same piece of land and looking at the arrival presumably from the south into Tamahiri. Could you talk me through how you would keep that sort of visual amenity of arriving in a country living style area, as opposed to, is it your intention to have planting on that on the corner where it talks about, where it says State Highway 1 and down that side of the motorway, or would what you see arriving be houses?
Sorry, can you just clarify, is that arriving from the state highway or from Tamahiri Drive?
Arriving from the state highway.
From the state highway, we're proposing an earth fund along that boundary for multiple purposes. One, visual, so it'll be vegetated as well, visual and acoustic and wastewater purposes. So basically it will be vegetated and you won't see the site, the subject.
Right, so yes, up where the cursor is where I'm thinking, oh, a little bit closer to the road.
Yep.
That area, yeah.
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
That will be an earth fund and vegetation.
Right, okay, thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you. Mr. Fulton.
Yes, thank you. Just looking at the land, and I live in the area, so I'm a little bit familiar with it, but it almost looks like it's all been disturbed soil, has it? It almost appears as if it's the surface of it is pretty disturbed. I mean, I parked on there at the Tamahiri markets and things like that, and I've just wondered about that.
Dave, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, no, it's been heavily modified. There's quite a network of gravel paths or roads that have been put in place for parking for the Tamahiri market. To do that, presumably the topsoil appears to have been removed and gravel put in its place. So yeah, it is fairly heavily modified.
Okay. Just how many in a village zone? How many sections? You did show us before, but I just didn't recall. Was it 5? You could develop on
we
there?
have drafted a concept plan.
Got 9, I think.
9.
Yeah, 8 residential lots, and then the 9th lot would be the childcare centre.
Right. So you own the childcare centre, is that right? Take that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooney.
Just a couple of questions. Just generally, the land across the road. What zone is that?
That is also rural zone.
That's all rural.
Yes.
Could you go back? Could you go back to the photo? Yeah, so that's all rural land. It looks pretty intensive development there. What's that? Is that a factory on the left?
So that photo is very out of date.
Is it?
That's gone now. But what wasn't historical?
There was a house removal yard.
And so what's there now?
So, and there was a specific overlay on the rural zone for that yard as well. What's there now is the land use consent was granted for Tamahiri Country Club.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, that is basically a construction site. There are, how many?
I think there's about 135 dwellings in there for the country club, and I believe maybe 60 odd are complete, and the rest will be completed by the end of next year, is my understanding.
Okay,
but
still retains its rural zoning.
It still has got rural zoning, yes. It's got the land use consent, but they're not subdividing, so they haven't triggered a prohibited rule. They've got multiple dwellings on the single title, as well as the communal facilities, the care beds, and the dementia care area as well.
It's a retirement village, isn't it? Effectively,
yes.
Even though it's called a country club, it's.
Yes, it is. Well, is it retirement or lifestyle?
Well, lifestyle retirement. I think they advertise on TV a fair bit. I think I've seen the ads.
I think the chairman's been interested in it.
Only out of welfare for one of my colleagues who might need it earlier than me.
Yeah. Okay. Just going back to your property. Do you know when services are likely to be provided there, if ever?
I doubt they will be. That's why we want to deal with wastewater on site. If services were to come in the future, we're going to have our own private network, which could be connected up to a council network anyway. The only service we may want is water, but we can make arrangements around that as well.
Yeah. I'm not sure whether you were here, any of you were here yesterday, but we had a bit of a debate about the scope of the NPSUD. And one of the issues for debate, and I think the lawyers may be interested in this, is that the emphasis on supplying urban capacity, and that means plan enabled and infrastructure ready. And given the nature of a village zone with its low density, and that it's unlikely that services will be provided, it seems to me, and I just float this out there, that it doesn't come within the ambit of the NPSUD. But never fear, we still can. It doesn't, in my view, doesn't exclude us from considering this in the normal way under whether it's appropriate and things like that. So I just want to know whether your legal advisor would like to make a comment on that. You can come back to us later if you like.
Okay, so I'll have a look at it and then I'll come back to it during the day. Maybe.
Yeah, it's an interesting point.
One that, like, when you say infrastructure ready, we are saying we can provide infrastructure on site to cater for it. Does it have to be public infrastructure ready?
Yeah, it does. And if you look closely at the MPS, it has to be a council provided infrastructure.
We know of, in our company here, various rezonings that occur that aren't infrastructure ready. There's Peacocks in Hamilton. That's been rezoned and they're still rushing to put a pipe in the ground now. It happens all around the country. There's lots of residential land in Auckland. There's no pipes in the ground there. There's remote villages like Kingseat. It's zoned for urban development. We don't know when they're actually going to get a pipe in the ground.
Yeah, I think that issue really comes down to the likelihood that the NPS doesn't say you must have it capable at the moment, but it must come in part of your strategic district plan, strategic planning document and your long-term plan. So, but I think it's a question of likelihood in those circumstances. And from what I gather from what you've said, it doesn't seem likely here. So I just raised that point.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. Am I right in thinking that that site's about 1.5 hectares, more or less? Is that right?
It's about 1.9.
1.9, okay. And just looking at the photo that's on the screen, the childcare centre's the sort of complex of buildings where the cursor is now. And is that your house, Mr. Quigley, further up and on Tamahiri Drive?
No, so that photo is pre the childcare, and it sits beneath that lower building, which is a kind of a workshop.
Okay, sorry, that's what I was trying to understand.
Yeah.
If we go back, yeah, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
And that's your house though, further?
No, that one's not. I have a tenant that.
Okay, but it's yeah, okay, I understand. You don't live there.
No.
And
so I was going to say, Fletcher, can you go back to the highlights package?
The summary's shows it a bit more clearly, I think. But it doesn't matter. That's all I really wanted to know.
I've got a more up-to-date photo. Unfortunately, it doesn't show any of the construction that's occurring across the road. But
yeah, no, understood. Understood. I mean, what else could you realistically do with that property if it wasn't some sort of, I mean, you can't call it rural, can you? I mean, it doesn't bear any resemblance to rural land at all. You know, it's landlocked. If it's rural at all, it's a paddock, a single landlocked paddock. What else could you realistically use it for, do you think?
Yep, I can take that. So again, my initial thought when I was contacted and I was looking at this in the office is, oh yeah, it's next to the expressway. Why don't you put a service centre there? So yeah, we could do numerous land use consent applications. Again, none of which would be a rural activity, but would probably be a suitable location for them. Possibly a second childcare centre, depending on demand. Yeah, there's just various land use proposals that could be considered there.
Pretty hard to conceive of anything that's rural in nature or even rural industry in nature, given the childcare centre and the dwelling. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Just finally, your original submission said country living or village, and you've sort of settled on village because it gives better effect to the NPS UD. What's your thoughts on leaving aside what the NPS UD might or might not say? What's your view of having development of that intensity that's actually quite some distance from the existing village zone? Do you think that it sort of creates some sort of precedent that people further down the chain will say, well, there's a second village forming here, and as a consequence of that, there's a whole bunch of future rezoning requests that might be a bit difficult to decline? And do you think country living might actually be a better fit, given the land use around it?
Country living would probably have the same effect of people down the road. It's because we've got the Tamahiri Country Club across the road on rural land. The zoning doesn't really matter. I think my main concern is that it's a prohibited activity to even apply for this under the rural zone. I would be comfortable applying as a non-complying activity under any zone and having this kind of proposal assessed on its merits.
Okay.
And of course, people down the road can think whether or not they can do the same thing, but it is more rural the further down the road you go. Properties do join up. They can be farmed together. I just think this environment has changed significantly. It is very urbanised, and it just seems strange to have a paddock just because of a zoning and without considering the surrounding area.
Yeah. Is that vegetation that you were asked about before, is that part of the, and I've forgotten what they're called, but they're those southern gullies, I think they might be referred to, that end up wandering their way down to the river? Is that one of those, or does that lead into one of those, or is it just simply a bunch of vegetation that's sitting there?
I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that on the other side of the expressway is the Mangaoni Stream Reserve there, but I don't know.
Is that the one that runs just the other side of the quarry, just literally across the road?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It just looks, I mean, I'm just trying to look at my own map here, and I wonder whether they are connected in some way, but maybe not, hard to tell. Anyway, that's very helpful, thank you. And Ms. Kaur, you can get back to us today. Maybe I think you and Dr. Forrett are appearing later in the day, maybe at the start of one of those presentations. You can whip in and deal with the National Policy Statement on Urban Development that Mr. Cooney asked you about.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, could I just ask a further question, just arising from some of your questions just there?
Of course.
The fact that you're now seeking a village zone, which is probably more intensive in terms of density, is there a reverse sensitivity issue here? Is that remote, or is it an issue? I'm talking about with the school, the childcare centre, because I've been involved in a lot of other cases where this issue has arisen in the past.
Probably the cases in the past have been a childcare centre wanting to establish. If you're buying this property, anything, if we could subdivide here, the childcare already exists. So if that is something that you would be sensitive to, don't buy the one next to the childcare centre.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ms. Kaur, and thank you, Mr. Shaw. That's pretty clear. I think we've clearly understand what you're seeking there, and I think we're hearing from you again now, Mr. Shaw, on behalf of the Voiles.
Yes, you are. So if we can just have a minute to rearrange the room.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Fletcher, if you could get the other highlights package up, that would be great. Thanks.
I'm having trouble finding it.
It's under hearing presentation on the website. I can get it up here if you like.
Yeah, no worries.
I've got it here. Shall I load it up?
Sounds good.
Okay, just give me 2 seconds while I open it. I'll just, whoops, what am I doing? Here we go. How's that? Can you see that?
Excellent, thank you. That's on the screen now. What I might do in this situation is I'll let Ian start the conversation. He's been on the property for over 30 years, so yeah, he can talk about the neighbourhood, and then I can answer more technical questions.
That's fine. We are reasonably familiar with certainly the general area. We've been to site there. We've had a dairy factory hearing already. We've also heard from Mr. DeLangen, who's immediately sort of down the end of Good Street and to the right of there. So we've got a pretty reasonable understanding of the general locality, just to make that clear.
Yep.
But Mr. Boyle, let's hear from you, please.
Okay, so this, from my point of view, we've been there over 30 years. We bought it for where it was because my kids could still walk to school, etc. They were urban kids. Both Darren and myself come off farms, so we wanted a bit of space. It happened to have an orchard on it of trees that we knew nothing about. There was existing sort of situation in place where the previous person had been running the orchard and exporting fruit. So we started off doing exactly that, only to discover that by the time we paid everybody in the chain and got up at silly times of the morning to spray toxic chemicals around, we didn't make any money. So we canned that and went to a non-sprayed local market setup where all we do is spend 3 months pruning the trees, and then they develop fruit, and we open the door for pick your own. It's quite entertaining, but far from lucrative. Effectively, I've never made a profit from the orchard in the 30 years I've been there, but it is a lifestyle. But I've now retired, so I can no longer keep affording to subsidise it. I'm surrounded by residential properties. The council in there have provided me a footpath right around my property. It's right in the village. To me, the sensible use for it is to become part of the village.
Yep.
The other thing is these opportunities to talk for rezoning or whatever don't come up very often because councils do things in their ways. I just thought this was an opportune time for it to be considered.
Well, that's clear enough, Mr. Boyle. I think we understand that.
Indeed.
Just to be clear, that's your property there, correct?
Correct.
That's it there.
Was it 3.78 hectares?
Yeah. How long have you had those persimmon trees on site?
Those persimmon trees would be 40 years old.
Okay.
Wow.
We've been there 32, I think it is.
All right, no, that's clear enough. Thank you. Mr. Shaw, you're going to talk to us about planning matters. Let's carry on and then we'll see if there's any questions for the team once we get to the end. I think that's probably the most efficient way.
Once again, we've got a rural zone property. The provisions pretty much prohibit applying for subdivision of any significance to this property. We are surrounded with residential activities, and as Ian said, we couldn't afford to spray, but it wouldn't be taken well from the adjoining residents if he was to do an intensive rural production activity that required a lot of spray. I guess it's nice that there is a production activity occurring. It's relatively organic, but it's not economic. And Ian's retired, and as he said, he can't afford to subsidise it. So that means the trees now have to come out. Servicing wise, again, it's what you would identify as it's not infrastructure ready, in that no one at council has looked at what the infrastructure requirements of Matangi are. We know the dairy factory next door have looked at a comprehensive on-site system, and again, that can connect to any future council-owned system if it was to come in the future. We've drafted up this 52-lot residential subdivision. Obviously, we can't apply for it tomorrow because there is no infrastructure, but there are other options. We could apply for most of it and have a communal system, such as what they're doing at the dairy factory. We could apply for larger village zone size lots, 2.5 to 3,000 square metre sections that have their own on-site systems, but acknowledging that they can be further intensified in the future. This is something that has occurred in the Peacock area around Hamilton. There are options, variable options to look at how we could develop this site now, but unfortunately the rural provisions prohibit us considering anything.
Okay. I'm not sure where you're up to on your presentation. I've sort of been trying to follow it, but
I'm not really following my presentation.
No, that's what that's fine. I'm just not sure.
I'm taking the presentation as read.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine.
Sorry.
Well, I think that's pretty clear. We understand what you've said, and I think because we've read your evidence, we've read the presentation previously. So, unless there's anything else you want to add now, I think we'll just see if there's any questions. Nothing to add?
No, just that, there's no jobs or income are going to be lost from the loss of this productive land. It doesn't make an income, and it can be more economically provide for housing in an area that's demanding housing. We've got a school hall, there's a community there. They're talking about starting a bus line to Hamilton, and yeah, once again, it's located in an area that makes sense for it to be residential.
Okay, no, I think we understand the point you're making. Let's see if there are any questions for you. Let's start with you, Ms. Sedgwick, please.
Thank you very much. Just two short questions. Did I read somewhere that it was Class 2 soils?
Yes. Yes, okay. It's a combination of 2W and 2S, which is wet and boggy and sandy. So yes, it is Class 2 soil.
Okay. And my other question is the property immediately above you on the map, if you like, which I imagine is north, just because I do. What's the zoning there? Is that village zoning there, or is that rural as well?
Put the map up.
Yeah, if you could put the map up, please, Mr. Bell.
I can put this one back up. Hold on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just need to move.
I think Mr. Shaw will be able to use that for reference for us, I think.
Yeah. So the adjacent property, what are the zonings of the adjacent properties?
The uncoloured ones are rural, and the pink ones are is that living or residential?
Right.
Maybe we'll get Mr. Bell to put the zoning map up, just to be clear. I would, just looking at the size of the sections, I'd say they're residential.
Yeah, living under the current plan, residential under the proposed.
Proposed plan.
with an industrial area in there as well.
With the industrial areas, the dairy factory site.
Yeah. So
let's just check that that's the operative plan. Can you put the proposed plan up, Mr. Bell, please? Can you put that layer on? Yeah, they're residential. The yellow's residential.
Yeah, residential.
Right. Okay. Okay. And so, how are they currently managing their wastewater there?
The ones on Good Street have a connection. So you might be able to turn the utilities layer on, please. They have a connection to the small council system, which is located on Matangi Road.
Right.
One's on Taplin Road. Do you know how they're?
They're just running off septic tanks on their own property.
Okay. On what size properties?
Those ones down on Taplin Road.
Mm.
Yeah, all those ones have their own septic tank.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
But they are.
Doesn't wear that flash.
They are, small residential properties. I'm not even sure if they're 1,000. They might be less.
Gosh. Okay. All right. That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gibb.
Sorry, Fletcher. The module above operative district plan turns on the utilities layer.
Oh, there we go.
So yeah, there's that public wastewater system in Good Street, but it stops. Just need to move this again. It doesn't extend to those Taplin Road properties.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. So there is no indication from the council that may have capacity to take.
Oh, the indication is that the current system is not meeting its discharge
okay.
requirements. It's a failing system.
Okay, thank you. I am finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Gibb?
Yes, thanks very much. I was wondering if you've had any discussions or talks over the fence with Mr. De Langen, who we heard from yesterday. His property is beside yours, I believe. His driveway looks like it goes on the north side.
Common driveway.
It's a common driveway. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting. So have you had discussions with him about any plans together at all? Or know of each other's plans?
Yes, I have talked to them about it, and yeah, I thought they were going to submit themselves, quite frankly, but
oh, they have submitted. I just wondered if you'd had any joint discussions on and knowing what each other was doing, wanting to
not directly, just that aware of what's going on, with the idea that we weren't asking for anything particularly different.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. I didn't realise they were at a hearing, so I don't know what they discussed. Could you just briefly summarise what they were after?
Yes, from memory. That was only yesterday. I think they were wanting to be able to subdivide in some form or another.
Okay.
Yep.
They've got slightly different issues than I have, in that I'm surrounded by residential houses. They're adjoining to the factory, which is also changing its zoning, looking for greater development. So we got slightly different issues, but both affecting sort of how you can operate rurally.
Okay, it's just interesting to know that's a shared driveway, so thanks for that. So yeah, appreciate your comments.
Thank you. Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, just a 52 lot would take a substantial amount of wastewater, wouldn't it, to develop? So I think to do that, as opposed to a village zone, which could be done, and this is what you're talking about, could be done on site and developed intensively later on when a wastewater system, and I suppose we have to be realistic, in some form there will be a wastewater connection in the area at some stage. But it appears from what I've heard that the council doesn't have any intention whatsoever to do any development. Is that right for the wastewater system in Matangi? It's marginal now.
You're still a councillor, Mr. Fulton?
No, I'm not.
Not anymore. Okay, you might. I thought you might have known a bit more about it than me. But yes, Matangi does appear to be an area that has been forgotten about by council.
Yeah. So realistically, to go to a living zone or a 52 lot, it just would seem nearly impractical, wouldn't it, at the stage until it was serviced, which could be a long way.
It's the same as many other urban zones in Hamilton and Auckland, that they do get rezoned before they know how they're going to service them. It's a chicken and egg situation. Which one comes first, and how long do we wait for council to look at it? That's why we do have the option of, and the dairy factory nearby has had to do the same thing. We do have the option of looking at how we can accommodate something on site in the short term, but also consider that, in the long term, a connection needs to be made available by the council. This area, the village, is identified as an urban expansion area. So I don't know when council are going to look at it, but at some point they need to.
It could put pressure on council to do something, couldn't it?
It could.
Okay. All right. No, I think that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mark?
No, nothing from me, thanks.
Mr. Cooney?
No, not for me. I do take Mr. Fulton's point about how intensive this would be in terms of residential, and I just wonder whether that's the appropriate zoning at this point in time, or whether if we were to look at it to change it to one of a village zone, if we were going to change it. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, the village zone, with the extra provisions that Te Kowhai and Tuakau have, that does allow for subdivision to occur tomorrow for larger lots, but it also recognises that when council do put in a reticulated system, then that's capable of accommodating the extra users, then they can be subdivided further into 1,000 square metres. Which is
that only applies to Te Kowhai and Tuakau, doesn't it?
Yeah, it only applies to those two, but those are the sort of provisions that would enable something to happen here as well. 1,000 square metres is still quite large. This is in an urban expansion area. I think that we've just had the long-term plan come out from council, and this area just keeps being ignored. It needs to be urbanised. It's recognised as somewhere that's to grow. So we kind of need to push things along a little bit faster than they seem to move.
Yeah, I suppose the council's like any other councils. It's only got a limited bucket of money to spend around the district. So anyhow, okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's why, development contributions can help cover that as well. We've got a failing system for the current residents and people that want to subdivide that would contribute to upgrading a new system, but council don't even know what they need to spend because they've not looked at it.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
I just want to follow up on both Mr. Cooney and Mr. Fulton. Isn't there I suppose there's on the assumption that we were minded to rezone this in some way, and obviously we haven't formed a view on that, but just on the hypothesis that we were, we'd be putting a bit of a gun to the council's head by zoning this residential with no real prospect of making it work until such time as they've fronted up with the money or you did. And I take the point that you're saying things have lagged. But just because you did that would be no guarantee that the council's coffers would enable this to happen, given competing priorities, etc., as Mr. Cooney has said. Wouldn't you guys be better off being able to subdivide that in the way that Mr. Cooney and Mr. Fulton talked about, so that you can at least get some runs on the board, enable you to move on without sort of, because if you just zone this residential, you can't do anything immediately, and it's going to take quite some time, even with the best will in the world, to get this site serviced or get the town serviced. What's your comment on that?
Yeah, again, as they've done in the Peacock area of Hamilton, they were able to create 5,000 square metre sections in the past, and it's now it's zoned for urban development and it's being intensified. So that is one of our options. There's many options for this property, and that one is, yes, we acknowledge it will be further subdivided. We can manage that with consent notices and specified building areas, and allow for the on-site disposal of wastewater now. One day,
it's a different proposition though from doing what you're asking us to do at the moment, which is to rezone it residential. We'd have to rezone it in some other way to facilitate what you're talking about. I don't think it would be appropriate, would it, to say let's zone it residential, full scale residential, and that you only then partly develop it with 5,000 square metre lots. You'd fall foul of the zoning provisions and attempting to make it effectively a large lot subdivision, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I can't recall all the provisions off the top of my head.
All right, no, that's okay.
I would usually, and I don't think it is, I can't recall it, usually there's a provision of connect to a reticulated system, or you've got to have a larger lot to deal with wastewater on site. I don't think that would be in the residential provisions.
Yeah, no, that's sort of what I'm postulating.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can consider that, and obviously, as I've said, we haven't made any determination about the merits of any of the proposals. We've got to think about that. But
yeah,
and just
a point,
to
propose more intense lots, then I'd suggest a communal system like they've got for the dairy factory.
Yeah, no,
there are the 2S, the sandy soils there. They're suitable for wastewater disposal. So we might only get half the lots on the property, and the rear half of the property would be for a communal wastewater system. At some time in the future, that could disappear and be further subdivided.
Yeah, understood. No, understood. Mr. Cooney, you were going to ask something.
Yeah, just as a matter of background, there are some houses there that are serviced, others aren't. The others rely on septic tanks. They are residentially zoned land.
Yes.
Is that just an historic thing where they've been rezoned residential because they've been established there for some time?
They have been. They're currently living zone. I don't know. They have been there for quite some time. I don't know when they were zoned for an urban purpose in the past. Under the operatives, they are living zone.
Probably 1950s or 60s, those sections were created. Two of the houses were moved onto have been moved on there in the last 30 years. Because there was empty sections there that have since been filled.
So under the operative plan, these were zoned, most of those were zoned what? Village, were they?
Living.
They were zoned what?
Living zone is what they were. Is that the equivalent of residential, or is that more like country living, or?
No, it's residential.
It is it's the name for the residential zone. Okay.
Yeah.
And in the proposed plan, they were all made residential?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both very much. That's helpful. You've given us some food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're due to break for morning tea in half an hour, so we're well ahead of schedule, I think we're going to press on the assumption that the Quigley Family Trust and Mr. Quigley are available. Hopefully they are.
If you want to give me a few minutes, I will. I'll go and see if they are here.
Is Mr. McDonald from Greenhill Road, are he or his representatives here at the moment? What about Bow Rock Properties?
Yes, Commissioner, Mr. McDonald and Greenhill are here, but I don't know that Miss Morse is quite ready yet. But certainly Quigley are here. We just need to find them in a different part of the building.
Okay, well, just so that we keep things moving, and rather than taking breaks sort of out of sequence and then ending up with a 3-hour lunch break or whatever, I think we're better to press on, and we're quite happy to wait a moment or two until all the relevant people are in the room.
Thank you.
Someone was having fun, that's good.
So Ms. Kaur again from Quigley Family Trust, Mr. Stuart Quigley and Mrs. Katrina Quigley are here in attendance. And
thank you and welcome.
Ms. Tracy Morse, planning expert.
Thank you.
And we have Ms. Judith Mackinson as transportation engineer to answer any questions from the panel.
Thank you very much.
So I'll just start with some brief submissions for the panel. Quigley Family Trust and Mr. and Mrs. Quigley have made submission and further submission on the proposed plan. The submission relates to the property at 233 Wilton Collieries Road, Glenmessie. And following the receipt of Section 42A framework, the submitters have decided to focus on rezoning their property as country living. It is submitted that submitters' proposal will support an existing village by concentrating appropriate residential development and is a better option for those seeking a rural lifestyle than allowing for ad hoc and scattered subdivision throughout the rural zone. The existing village has both country and village zone. The rural residential lots will be largely self-sufficient in terms of 3 waters infrastructure. Shared access lots will be provided by the developer at the time of development. And we know that Glen Messie Village provides existing infrastructure amenities such as school. In our submission, Glen Messie is located outside of the Waikato Basin, where demand for rural residential development is strongest due to its proximity to Hamilton City and easy commuting distances. It is also relevant that a subdivision consent has previously been approved for the subject site to create 18 lots over 5 stages, including associated earthworks and works within road reserve. Of these 18 lots, 2 were given effect to and obtained title prior to the resource consent lapsing. Ms. Moore's planning evidence provides an extensive analysis of the key objectives and policies of the regional policy statement that are relevant to the submitter's submission. From this analysis, it is evident that the submitter's proposal aligns with the regional policy statement. It is submitted that a country living zone is the preferred form for Glen Messie in order to complement the existing local community. Such an approach would be consistent with the positive environmental, social, cultural, and economic outcomes which Objectives 3.12 seeks to achieve. The proposal also aligns with the principles in Section 6A of the regional policy statement on the basis that Glen Messie is an existing urban area which consists of primary school and is adjacent to Glen Messie Village. Therefore, it will be connected to existing development and social infrastructure by road. Future development will be self-sufficient. The rezoning will not compromise the safe, efficient, and effective operation of Wilton Collieries Road. There is sufficient capacity within the road formation to accommodate current vehicle movements, as well as the additional demand associated with country living development of the site. Water requirements for a future subdivision of the site will most likely be met by rainwater harvesting on a lot-by-lot basis. And by concentrating development in this location, pressure will be reduced on surrounding rural areas, which help preserve wider surrounding rural character values. The development of approximately 20 rural residential lots under country living zone is not of a scale or location that will compromise the future-proof settlement pattern. Further, the separation of urban areas will be maintained by virtue of the distance of Glen Messie from the 2 closest urban areas. Nervahia is about 11.4 k and Hamilton is 21 k. The Section 42A report, although rejecting the submitter's submission to rezoning their land to country living, recommends altering the notified proposed district plan zoning for part of Glen Messie, and I'm referring to submission 551859 Wainara Road, Glen Messie, from country living to village zone.
That's Mrs. Rodke's property, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, we heard from her yesterday, so we're pretty familiar with what they're seeking and its relationship to your property and what the Section 42A report recommends for that property.
Thank you, sir.
We're aware of that background is all I'm saying.
Okay, thank you, sir. So yeah, in our submission, I think the reporting officer's reasoning can similarly be applied to our client's rezoning proposal, given there is approved subdivision consent. The submitter's proposal will support existing village by concentrating appropriate residential development on land and is better option for those seeking a rural lifestyle than allowing for ad hoc and scattered subdivision. And it is also submitted that nothing has changed in the receiving environment since the previously approved consent in 2007. Although the planning environment, as the panel is aware, has changed since 2007. In our submission, none of the provisions in RMA or regional policy statement or future-proof intend on inflexible approach to rezoning and or residential development, including rural residential development. Rather, it is the interpretation and application of those provisions to avoid unplanned and inappropriate rural residential development that is stifling villages in the district. There is still a place for planned and appropriate rural residential development in the district. And those are my submissions. I can get Ms. Morse to start her planning evidence.
I think we'll take the same approach as we have before, Ms. Kaur, if you're happy with that. Let's hear the full story, and then we'll see if there's any questions for either you or Ms. Morse.
Thank you, sir. Fletcher, can you please put the highlight package on?
Thank you, Fletcher.
I've got it here if you want it, Mr. Bell. I've got it right.
Excellent.
Yeah, no worries.
Here we go. Tell me when that pops up.
Yeah, it's up now. Thank you.
Okay.
So
take the title page as read.
Yeah. So as Ms. Cower discussed, the site's located at 233 Wilton Collieries Road, approximately 400 metres south of the Glen Massey village. Its current notified version of the proposed Waikato District Plan identifies the site as remaining rural zoned without consideration of limitations on the productive rural consenting history of the site. The site has previously been identified by AgFirst as appended to the evidence in chief as being of limited productivity in terms of terrain and soil quality, and will not represent a loss of high production land. The submitters seek to basically to re-establish their lapsed subdivision consent for 18 lots, which they were of, yeah, I can let Stuart and Katrina talk to that more specifically, but they essentially just want to see that completed and to enable provision of additional housing adjacent to the existing village that's of a scale and nature that's appropriate to the location. So reflecting its peri-urban, peri-rural nature and limited productivity potential. So the site is quite difficult in terms of terrain. So there's very, very considerable constraints on the ability for productive farming. It is each of the identified lots that were previously approved are sufficient in size and shape to accommodate on-site wastewater and stormwater management and to obtain water supply via roof and rain capture. There is no intention to connect any public facility network utilities, given there's none in the area. And there is, as Ms. Cower mentioned, and as Mrs. Mackinson can discuss, the roading network has ample capacity to accommodate the development as was originally determined by council in 2007. That has not altered as a result of the transition of time. The property was zoned previously rural, but if we go back to the previously operative district plan, it was actually country living. So there was a period when they, shortly, I think around the time they purchased the property and around when they were seeking subdivision consent, that the zoning changed for the property. So it's not out of context for this property that be zoned country living. And I think what they're seeking is an efficient and appropriate use of the property in consideration of the relevant planning provisions. Yeah, that's, yeah, it complements the nearby rural community of Glen Massey and would be consistent in achieving the positive environmental, social, cultural and economic outcomes sought under the district plan, the regional policy statement, And I think, yeah, that's really in a nutshell.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Morse. Is there anything you need to tell us, Ms. Mackinson? I mean, we've read the documentation, and Ms. Morse has summarised the conclusions of your work. Are you happy to leave it at that, and that we can, if we have any questions about that, we can pick them up via questioning? You happy with that?
I'm happy with that if you are, so yes.
Okay. All right. I think let's see if there are any questions, and we're happy, as we indicated earlier, for whoever the right person is to answer the question. That's perfectly fine with us. Can we start with you, please, Ms. Gibb?
Thank you. I mentioned yesterday, actually, that road, it starts off Tarseel and then it goes to Metal. And I know there's there's more traffic on that road than there would have been when you first bought that property and decided to do country living, when you had the original consent. So I'm just wanting some feedback on your thoughts, or the owners. Are they? I think they're there, aren't they? The owners.
Yes.
The owners' thoughts on the traffic on that road. In particular, my thoughts go to, if there's more people travelling that road, is there going to be then more pressure on council to try and Tarseel further up? Because there has been some talk about the excess traffic now. So can I have some feedback on that, please?
Yes, when we first bought the property, it was zoned rural residential, and then after our subdivision was granted, there was a small block at the top of the road granted a subdivision consent up there, which took 3 titles off or split a block into 3 titles. That's the only increase in the road since that time. The traffic volumes on the road are very low, other than at school time. You might find that at 8 o'clock you've got one farm worker comes in from out of the village, and you get the school children being delivered down to school, typically in a carpooling exercise from up top. There's a couple of families up there that pool and take the children down to school, drop them at the Glen Massey school, and then pick them up at 3 o'clock. Other than that, there is very little traffic on the road. You might get the odd stock truck occasionally. And then we have a concrete truck come into the top of the road once a week, probably, for our business that runs up the top there. And that's about it. There's not a lot of traffic on it at all, really.
So can you, what is your business, sir?
We build bridges. So the district council gave us resource consent about 20 years ago to run our bridge building operation from up there to keep us in the district. And so we bought right at the end of the road, which was the Wilton Colliery mine. And we run a pre-stressed concrete yard up there building pre-stressed bridge components. And the last 2 years, we've been trucking out 25-metre girders. The longest we've ever pulled out of that road is a 30-metre girder. That was for Waipaha District Council. So the road, the heaviest we've ever pulled out has been 50-tonne units for over State Highway 25. So the road is quite capable of those sort of things. And all that happens is when we need to do anything like that, we just send out a courtesy drop to say, hey guys, we've got girders going out tomorrow around this time. I hope nobody's planning stock movements or whatever. And we just coordinate with the different neighbours to make sure that we let them know when our girders are leaving and when they're doing stock movements, and we have no problems whatsoever.
Okay, thanks very much.
May I add to that, Ms. Gibb, from a technical perspective?
Yes.
So at the moment, the traffic count on Walton Collieries Road is estimated to be about 75 vehicles per day. That's an estimated value from council. With an 18 to 20 lot residential subdivision in place, that might increase to around the 250, 260 vehicles per day mark. Now, if we look at Wilton Collieries Road in the context of the one network road classification and also the code of practice for traffic management, a 500 vehicle per day limit is what you would expect on a low volume local road. So it is currently well within the low volume local road status and would remain in that status with sort of country living style development in place. And in terms of whether that requires seal or not, a low volume local road of under 500 vehicles per day, I would, in my opinion, consider as suitable to remain unsealed. So whether there is pressure on council or not to seal the road and additional expense in future, it would not be necessary, in my opinion. And I also think it's important to understand that as part of the original subdivision consent, upgrades to the road were required by the applicants, and that included widening of the road surface and also putting in some benching on some corners to improve visibility. Now that work has already been done, so the improvements are in place, but the development that required them has not yet occurred because the subdivision consent has lapsed. So in my opinion, the road environment is already in place to support that extra sort of 18 to 20 households worth of traffic.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you. Mr. Mark?
Just going back to your business, Mr. Quigley, how many people do you actually employ there?
We only employ 3 at the moment. It is difficult getting people who want to travel that far out, and also today, for some reason, a lot of people don't want to travel away for work, and unfortunately there's not many bridges installed in a building. They're all over the country. So our next one's going off to Wellington.
Right. And do you see future opportunity in expanding the business opportunity that you've got there today? If indeed this residential went ahead, do you see this business growing?
Not really. Bridge building is a sort of a niche market. We've gone back from doing a lot of council road bridges and transit work to mainly rural work now. And it's not, with the way things are, it's too difficult to get staff that want to work outside in the weather and things like that. I don't see it growing.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Fulton?
Yes, thank you. So what we're hearing is that the 18-lot subdivision that had been consented lapsed, and it lapsed because of no development or no advancement in the development of the subdivision took place. That's the right assumption. Have I taken that?
No, that's not quite correct.
That's
Sorry,
incorrect.
Mr. Fulton. So they completed one of the stages, the 5th stage, to create 2 titles. What happened was that they had not completed the other stages prior of subdivision, so they had not obtained 2 to 3 approval from council for the remaining stages to complete the subdivision within the 5 years. And there was a lot of correspondence between and meetings between Stuart and Katrina and Mr. and Mrs. Quigley and the council staff regarding resolution of various conditions and issues about implementation of those conditions. And in order, because they were progressing quite substantially towards enabling the rest of the subdivision, and unbeknownst to them, it had lapsed in that period. So it was more of an oversight than a not actually giving effect to. So that's...
All 18 lots have been surveyed and pegged. Entranceways have been put in for them, with right-of-ways put in on some of them. A lot of the titles are fenced. but things got prolonged out, and by the time the first we knew it had lapsed was a letter from council saying it's all over.
Okay, so you're asking us really to consider effectively reinstating the consent that had been given without any further assessments. And I'm talking about going through a whole planning process again.
No, that's not correct. Sorry if I may, Mr. Filton.
Yep.
What they're seeking is zoning to enable them to reconsent that. So it would be supported by relevant current specialist inputs. So it would be updated to reflect current engineering, geotech standards, any changes since it originally obtained consent in 2007.
Okay, thank you very much. That's made it clear for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Fulton. Mr. Marg?
No, nothing further from me, thanks.
Mr. Cooney?
If we were to rezone it country living, we've got the property up above you. Well, there's a gap in between, and then we've got the property above, which is seeking village zoning, and it was approved in the Section 42A report. How would this fit within that sort of context from a planning perspective?
There's a little one, and that's rural. So, sorry, Mr. Bell, can you bring up the map showing the properties? That would be possible, and that would be quite useful for this point. Thank you. Yeah. So the property between the two is just that's all part of the Robski's
it's all
property.
The Robski
so there's
property.
A little property just to the northwest. Yeah, that one. That's rural. Yeah. So that's the only real sort of separation. But there's actually a contiguous boundary between Robski's property and Mr. and Mrs. Quigley's property.
Right.
And KV's lot is quite a small lot with 2 dwellings on it as it is. I think it's.
So it's part of that lifestyle.
What is that zoned?
That zone there is also another section, a house section.
But what is it zoned?
It's all rural. It's all rural.
Okay. But it all used to be rural residential.
So under not the current operative plan, but the plan prior to that.
Can we go back to that other plan with a gap in it?
Yeah. So that's the proposed zoning.
Yeah.
And the current operative plan had the country living going down to that boundary with the Quigley's property.
Yeah.
And the plan prior to that, the Quigley's property, the operative plan prior to that, actually the Quigley's property was country living or equivalent zoning.
And the plan before that, it was rural residential, and the other side of the road was rural residential as well. There was a couple of 100 acres just adjacent to our property. Further up the road, it was all owned previously by NUSM. And the whole lot had been an improved subdivision before we purchased it.
Yeah, but let's look at what's proposed here.
Yes,
can you bring that out a little bit? Sorry, not out. Yeah, that's it. So you got, I think it was a modified village zone above you. You got a gap in between, and you're seeking country living zone there. So how does that all fit together, in your opinion?
From a planning perspective, it's complementing the village. It's not really a node. It's not really a village context because it's not of the scale of the village. Like if you look at the density of residential development that's in the Glen Massey village, it's more village-esque. This is rural lifestyle type of development. So and a lot of it's going to be actually not visible from the road because of the contours of the land. So it's not going to create that from a passing vehicle movement. It's not going to create a sense of sprawl of the village. It's not going to alter that perspective of the area surrounding Glen Massey. From a practical community perspective, in terms of planning, it's not seeking extension of any infrastructure, and it will, from a zoning residential, it's probably more along the lines of complementing and filling in the gaps rather than between the gullies, because there's a lot of gullies intersect that within that property, not intersect within the property. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah.
The families that it brings into that area will also help boost the village environment with the schooling. Most of the people that want to come out there are people that are looking for a rural residential lifestyle, because the school in the area has a great pet day and very country style thing, and very family orientated values. And
okay, thank you.
And I don't think I have any questions. The questions I would have asked have been covered by the other.
Mr. Chair, I actually have some questions.
Oh, sorry, did I miss you, Ms. Cedric? I'm sorry.
Absolutely, totally.
Did I miss Mr. Marg as well?
No, you asked him. You asked him twice.
Okay, sorry, I've put the wrong tick next to my list. My apologies.
I remain unticked, and I'd like to thank Ms. Mackinson for her information. That was really helpful, because my questions were around vehicle movements per day, and you've answered those. Can you tell me what, I'm assuming that the road between the property and the village heads, what's the gradient? I assume it heads downhill. By the way, I've picked up in the conversations down to the village, down and up to the property. Is that correct? Is it a downhill gradient?
In general, yes. It is quite undulating through there. So you do have both uphill and downhill gradients, but I would say the general trend is downhill. I couldn't give an accurate measurement of gradient, but it's certainly within what I would expect of a low volume unsealed local road. It's not extreme in any particular location. It's easily drivable by a small car. Doesn't have to be
okay. And so is that the part that's unsealed?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So would that then make it difficult? So I note you 400 kilometres, half a kilometre, sorry, 400 metres from the village. Is that walkable in your opinion on that road?
Yes, we have people walk and cycle all the way to the top. Right. We live right at the very end of the road, and a lot of mountain bike people cycle all the way to the top of the road. I'm not quite sure why. But...
No, crazy people.
I would like to add to that, if I may, that because of the topography and the fact that it's an unsealed road, whilst it is technically subject to 100 kilometres per hour speed limit, being an open road speed limit, the practical maximum driving speed, I would suggest, is around 40 kilometres an hour on the straighter sections and significantly below that in the windier sections. So in terms of people walking and cycling along it, I think, yes, you'd have to be a mountain biker to do it. You wouldn't want to do it on a road bike because of the surface. But there is no reason that you could not walk and cycle into the village. With any narrow road, care and attention is required. But because of the surface, you actually have a very good audible queue of approaching vehicles before you might actually see them.
Right.
You can hear things coming a long way away because of the unsealed surface of the road. So there's plenty of opportunity for pedestrians to be aware of approaching traffic, to move to the side to let them pass.
So the line behind my questioning is that people moving to on an unsealed road to a rural area, potentially having moved from an area with more amenities, soon have an expectation that that road should be sealed. And I'm just wondering, you were saying at 260 vehicle movements a day, you would still say that would be low in vehicle movements for a sealed road?
Yes, I would.
Right, okay. Okay, thank you very much. Your information was really helpful.
All right, thank you all. Thank you all very much.
Chair, could I please have another question?
Sure.
Thank you. I've been in discussion in the course of my other duties with residents on that road, and they have issues at times with flooding of the creek. Is it called Firewood Creek that goes down that way, or is it just a gully? And it seems to me that the topography of the land, and I've seen maps that have been drawn up by our waters people, that it all seems to converge downhill when there's rain events, etc. Because of the topography, it kind of tends to go downhill towards those residents. And I'm just wondering about earthwork movements to make building platforms on the proposed land, whether there's been some thought to the mitigation around what would happen with earthwork changes to a natural gully like that. I've just thought about this while we've been talking about the topography. So wondering if anyone's had any, put their mind to those types of issues.
Yes, so the topography that's there and the size of the section lots are reasonably substantial, and to create a house platform on those is very minimal in work. The flooding that occurs on the Firewood Creek is mainly because of the installation of non-consented illegal culvert works in the village. I actually reported one earlier this year to Regional Council that had just been put in, because it's just woefully inadequate the way it's been put in, and it's obviously done with no consent. Regional is working with that particular owner to get it remedied. But we have a problem in that area where people think they're away from things and can just do whatever they want and not have a consent for it or whatever. And you're just constricting the waterway and doing things that should not be done. The building platforms on that site would all be done in accordance with Regional Council's earthworks plans. You would not get any runoff. That'd all be silk fenced and things like that while you're doing those works. And typically a lot of that stuff is done in the summertime, because you've got to have certain moisture levels to get your compactions on your building sites. So you're not going to be doing those in high rainfall periods. You would absolutely be minimizing any potential risk of runoff to those watersheds. And once they're built on, then any water catchment that lands on those sites is then captured, thereby minimizing the flow off to the creeks. Because up in those rural places, you catch every drop of rain you can to save buying water in the summer. So you're actually going to minimize the peak flows into the water channels.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Let's just check if there are any more questions from the panel. Appears not. Thank you very much, all of you, for the clarity of what you've presented.
Indeed.
That's very helpful, thank you. We'll break for morning tea and come back at 5 to 11 when we'll hear from Mr. McDonald / Callum Bray Trust, I believe. Don't log off your computer for those of you that are wanting to stay on. Please just mute yourselves and turn the video off. All right, we'll be back in quarter of an hour. Thank you. Everybody's back. Thank you, everybody. We'll resume now, and we're due to hear from the Callum Bray Trust, I think is the name of the submitter, but I think it's also Mr. McDonald and team. So We're in your hands, guys.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm representing the submitter was Malcolm MacDonald, who's now deceased. His son Warwick MacDonald's here, and speaking on behalf of his business, which is the Kellenbury Trust as well. I've got Tracy Morse here, who has prepared evidence. I thank you for allowing us to provide some legal submissions as well. There's nothing in writing because we've been only recently instructed. I'd just like to say at the outset that we appreciate that the huge volumes of paper and so forth that that the panel's wading through and the huge amount of information. But at the other side of this, for the consultants and those that have been involved, there's also the time schedules have been pretty tight, and where consulting firms and counsel are representing multiple clients, it has been pretty difficult to keep up. And so we appreciate that your indulgence where there are little glitches with things and errors and typos and so forth, because people are trying to do their best. This proposal, the MacDonald submission, is seeking to rezone a very discrete area of land. It's nearly 4.5 hectares adjoining the expressway, and they're seeking to create a service centre. And the proposal is that it would be the commercial zone with a motorway service centre overlay. And Ms. Morse has prepared a planning provision that could apply for how this overlay would work. And she has this morning emailed that to Mr. Fletcher. And we'd be, we're hoping that the panel will have time to be able to have a look at that provision as to how it would work. Essentially, it would make the service centre proposal a controlled activity, so it would trigger the need for a resource consent, but it would be confined to service centre related activities, so activities that are there to serve the passing traffic on the expressway.
We have received that by email. But we've only looked at it over. Well, I've only looked at it over the break. But we're happy for you to speak to it, or Ms. Morse to speak to it.
Excellent, thank you. Ms. Morse will speak to that. So there's the theme that seems to have come through in the Section 42A reports has been that it seems to me that any rezoning request is going to be contrary to future-proof, and therefore it's recommended for decline. And from the outset in my submission, this is not contrary to future-proof. Future-proof is not about where motorway service centres should be located. Clearly, the motorway is the key element in this proposal. It's a proposal that's not creating a commercial destination. It is proposed to be a motorway service centre. There's currently no service centre located on the southbound side of the expressway between Bombay and Cambridge. There are currently 2 on the western or northbound side, with a further service centre for the northbound traffic planned at Ruakura. But there's none from Bombay to Cambridge. Development of the service centre will not of itself stimulate other commercial development on the adjoining land. there has to be a planning framework to enable that. And we note the example of the 3 service stations that are currently on the intersection at Bombay, and they're surrounded on all sides by rural land and have been for, you know, since they've been built, which is well over 15 years. The proposal is to rezone part of the land to business with a motorway service overlay. There'd be a resource consent needed for the development, and that resource consent would trigger an integrated traffic assessment. In my submission, that the proposal does not lend itself to any kind of commercial creep. That ability to creep outside of the discrete area is in the control of the council itself. Ms. Morse, as I said, has got some overlay that would apply. So it would be a controlled activity. The proposal would also trigger a resource consent because it'd have hazardous substance storage on site. Signage may trigger the need for a consent, and the traffic assessment would certainly also be required. Yes, it is on a small area of high-class soil, but the motorway itself has taken out quite a big swathe of high-class soil, and that motorway triggers the need for services. And Mr. McDonald will be able to, he can give evidence of mechanisms for mitigating that small loss of productive soils, and that there are various mitigations that they can make to address that. In my submission, using the future-proof as an excuse to oppose all development is not in the best interests of the district, and it does not allow for the needs of the infrastructure that's now in place. The Greenhill Road site has great visibility. It can provide a safe and necessary opportunity for southbound drivers that need a service centre. It'll not compromise the operation of the other service centres. And I note the number of places in the region where there are multiple service stations on the same interchange or on opposite sides of the state highway, and will not compromise the ongoing productivity of the existing dairy farm. It's a rezoning opportunity that makes sense, and it needs to have a zone that recognises its appropriateness. It can provide its own infrastructure and already has support from prospective tenants, and it's not going to compromise the rural community in Puketaha, and nor will it constitute, in my submission, it will not constitute unplanned urban growth. And those are my opening remarks.
All right, thank you. Let's press on as we have done for the rest of the morning, and we'll ask any questions of the team as a whole, I think.
I think perhaps if Mr. McDonald goes in next and he can provide kind of more of the factual detail.
Sure.
Sure. Hi guys. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to us. What I wanted to do was just give you just a quick, brief background on the due diligence process we've been through to come to an understanding as to how this could be a successful service centre and why we've chosen, well, it's an opportunity that's landed on our doorstep. First and foremost, as previously mentioned by Joan, there is no service centres between Bombay and Cambridge for southbound traffic. The service centres on the western side of the motorway, but none on the eastern side. Also, as part of that research with experts we consulted, they said traffic, 80% of traffic generally tries to go into a service centre on the same side of the motorway as it's travelling. And this is particularly the case for large trucks and vehicles like that. What they say is the convenience for getting those trucks through the interchanges and that to go to the opposite side of the road is not ideal. So from a point of view of servicing the motorway, it's a really good location, as there's nothing doing that at this point in time. Everybody crosses over. Also, in determining whether it's a good location is also relative to other service centres. So for us, again, we looked at between Bombay and Cambridge, which is that stretch. There is simply 75 kilometres with no service centres on the eastern side. The ingress and the egress is super important, which is why we're looking to put the service centre next to the on and off ramps at the Greenhill Road interchange. It provides a really good opportunity. Also from a commercial point of view, we've been through the costings and all that kind of thing, and the answer is simply yes, it is a really good commercial option for us. Part of that is also the visibility of the service centre. So at the moment, when you go over the Puketaha Road flyover, the service centre is easily visible 1.3 kilometres before the service centre, so that drivers have ample opportunity to make decisions whether they're going to come off. So it's got really good visibility, really good from a safety point of view. We've also gone to potential tenants. At the moment, we have the 3 large tenants with lease agreements in front of them for the service centre operator, the service station operator, the QSR, the main QSR that goes with it. They have a lease agreement and are very enthusiastic as well as an independent operator for the standalone food and beverage alternative to the QSR. The other building itself, we have tenants who have expressed interest, but we're holding off on those until we go through the process. So we're a long way down the track of going through the due diligence process and that kind of thing. Further than that, we've obviously spoken to our banks to look at financing and all that, and the finance is all in place to push go on this if we're successful. So from our point of view, in summary, the way we look at it is we have the land, we have the location, we have the design, we have the tenants, we have the financing, we have everything in place to make a really successful service centre, and I think it's something that is needed for southbound traffic. And I guess part of that is what we're really looking for is support from the council to see if we can make this happen. And I guess that's a large part of what we're seeking. On the balance of the farm, just to give you a little more information on the farm and what we do. We've been farming there for 50 years. We bought the first block. My father bought the first block in 1968. We have 270 hectares on which we're milking 700 cows at the moment. And obviously from a farming point of view, disappointing to lose part of the back end of the farm. However, there's a few things we're doing to mitigate that. The first and foremost, which has come up most recently, is NZTA have come back to us about 6 weeks ago and have offered us back land that is surplus to their requirements. We have said, yes, we do want to purchase that surplus land. We have approximately 3 kilometres of land that runs adjacent to the motorway, and much of that is now being the boundaries have been relocated to match what's needed, and the balance of that we're looking to purchase, and we're hoping that would go a large way to offsetting the land that we lose in this particular service centre from the farm. So we're doing that. Other things we are doing is this summer we've built a feed pad on the farm to enable additional feed for the stock. Which we think is a good move anyway, but it also helps with mitigating any downside from this. Look, and our general philosophy when it comes to the farming, to be honest, is if we're not moving forward and expanding and growing, we're almost standing still or going backwards. So certainly our philosophy around farming and around this type of thing is with the farm, we're continuing to develop, continuing to invest. We see us, I guess, farming for the foreseeable future, but we also see a service centre in this particular location as a great opportunity for us to take advantage of a motorway that came from, literally wasn't part of anything and turned up on our doorstep. So that's where we've got to. That's the due diligence process we've gone through, and that's where we are at the moment with the process.
All right, thanks very much, Mr. McDonald. Let's press on and hear from Ms. Morse, and then we'll see if we have any questions for your team.
Good morning, panel. Good to speak to you all again.
Do you want your little presentation, your one pager on the screen? Is that what you're after?
I'll
put it on because the panel may not have had the chance to look at it.
I think that's quite a good idea. So I can talk to this first, might be a good option in terms of what we're seeking from the plan review and from our submission. So what I've done is highlighted what the current business zone provisions enable, which is the zone we're seeking. So it enables quite a broad range of activities as permitted. So they do not require any form of resource consent. What we're seeking is to refine that to reflect the service centre nature of what we're seeking to establish on this part of the site through an overlay. And so we're refining that broad nature of the activities enabled under the business zone to those directly associated with a service centre, so service stations, truck stop, food and beverage retail only, and fast food, which is, as Mr. McDonald's has referred to as QSR, and other amenities associated with that, such as a playground, picnic tables, toilet blocks, quite similar to the service centres in Drury and Bombay. And we would consider it appropriate that those be controlled activities so that there's still an ability to overview the proposal as it stands in relation to certain features such as parking, access, design, while still generally being within that broadly anticipated nature. And then we've included several conditions / rules to include within the plan to achieve that refinement of the business zone. So limiting the type of commercial activities and services that are enabled and the scale of those. So we've limited the floor area for each individual tenancy to 150 metres squared as a way of avoiding creating large format retail that becomes a destination of its own. And it really emphasises that it's all there to support the service centre and the service station activity and service the passing traffic. Also limiting offices to those that are ancillary to businesses that are going to operate on the site, so that we're not creating an employment hub through creation of offices. Public transport facilities, we don't see this as being a transport hub or an interchange or anything, although enabling a bus stop for pickup, drop off, like they offer at, they offer one at Cambridge, or they used to, when the state highway used to run through Cambridge. Shows my age that that's the last time I caught a public bus. In Tokoroa and Wairaki, the Wairaki BP. So they have a stop off sort of quick pickup facility, drop off facility there. So it's nothing more than a little flagged sign so that you can just, if you have purchased a ticket, you can get on, get off at those locations. And exclude residential activities which are enabled in the business zone for above ground, and educational facilities, childcare facilities, health facilities, places of assembly, and travellers accommodation, because we don't think those are appropriate and they create a destination type approach which we're not seeking and we don't think is appropriate in this location, because it would then contribute towards commercial business zone type sprawl from the city, which we're not seeking in any way, shape or form. And that any of those applications are supported by an integrated traffic assessment to ensure that access, vehicle movements and such are all properly addressed within an application or applications. So that's how we see the overlay as functioning and how the business zone and the sort zoning and overlay would function for the site. And I think that's really the crux of what we're seeking. From talking to the Section 42A report, I think the planner has probably overreached in terms of how they view the activity in relation to future-proof and contributing to the urban function of Hamilton City. We've, as part of our due diligence, undertaken a retail impact, it's not a full retail impact assessment, but it's been undertaken by retail economists with regards to the impact of providing the service centre and those food and beverage retail activities in proximity to the Hamilton City limit. And they've found that it will not contribute to pulling activities away from the centre. So we can share that we're also working in the background towards a resource consent for the service centre. So a lot of this information's being prepared towards that. So we're seeking to accommodate a petrol station, a truck stop, electric car charging facilities adjacent to the petrol station, fast food restaurants, several food and beverage retail tenancies, and a rest area. And it's, as previously mentioned by Ms. Burrett, it'll be the first service centre for southbound traffic from Bombay, between Bombay and Cambridge. So we see it as providing it's an appropriate location, given that that's quite a distance for long travelling. The service centre is being designed to be largely self-sufficient in terms of infrastructure with Three Waters, so looking at developing the stormwater, wastewater and water supply provisions at the moment. It's largely completed that design in terms of pre-resource consent development or reporting. In terms of the access and consultation with Waka Kotahi New Zealand Transport Agency, we've been trying to liaise with them to have a discussion around the access arrangement, but despite multiple iterations and options of access arrangements, that we're yet to be able to secure a meeting with them. And that's not through lack of trying. So we are trying to coordinate that with them and get them on board in terms of the access to the proposal, so that we have a coordinated approach between our proposal and obviously the fundamental medium to get customers to the site, being the Waikato Expressway. Overall, we consider that the business owner motorway service centre overlay for the site would complement the Waikato Expressway, and that the rezoning would achieve positive environmental, social, cultural and economic outcomes, predominantly social and economic. Further, the service centre will be largely self-sufficient in terms of its Three Waters infrastructure, and is not inconsistent with the outcomes sought under the district plan, future proof, and the regional policy statement.
You're starting to get reasonably repetitive. You've sort of explained the self-sufficiency and so forth about 2 or 3 different times. Can I just get you to, get to the pointy end if you're not there already, and then we'll see if we've got any questions. Because I think we understand the proposal. I think we understand what it is you're seeking. I think we understand what you see the benefits of it are. So I just ask you to press on, please.
Yep. No, I was pretty much winding up and saying that the detailed objectives and policies and higher order planning document assessment has been covered appropriately in my section 32A analysis that I believe you've all read and tabled as read. So that was pretty much where I was going to close. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Dr. Forrett, that's all your team is going to present to us, as I understand it. So we can move to questions. Let's start with you, Ms. Cedric, please.
Thank you. I have a number of questions in no particular order. So my understanding of this is you're going to be very, very close to the Hamilton City urban boundary. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
And what's your thinking on reverse sensitivity from your service station, and how would you manage that?
I can talk to that if it pleases you. the service centre is going to be largely separated from the adjacent Hamilton City residential activities that are going to be established in that area through the actual formation of through the width and movements of the expressway, where it's also of a different elevation to the adjacent residential area.
Just to explain, the expressway as it is at the moment goes over Greenhill Road or the old Greenhill Road, and then over Pardova. So the actual motorway at that point is very high up. It's maybe 6, 7, 8 meters up. Our service centre is down. So when you come off the off-ramp and down the slip lane, the actual service centre is located down. So you physically can't see over the motorway as it is at the moment because it's built up.
Oh, could we have a map? Thank you. That's
great.
Yes.
Yeah. So the motorway is rising up as it goes over Greenhill Road or the old Greenhill Road and then over Pardova. So there's actually it's really gets very high through there. And we're down in the paddock, and so visibly you can't really see over the motorway at all at that particular point when you're in the paddock. So there's a certain amount of space, and there's also a certain amount of height that creates a barrier between the urban, which is coming out to there eventually, and where the motorway currently sits.
Thank you for that. My second...
Can I just ask you, when you were asking about reverse sensitivity, was it reverse sensitivity on the new residential, or is it reverse sensitivity on the existing dairy farm?
No, I was thinking of the new residential.
Yeah, the new residential, because my understanding, Mr. McDonald, is that is across the road, isn't it? There's no...
Yeah, I can see that. I can see
cool.
that.
Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of other questions. I note that you've had no consultation with iwi, although I did note a fairly small passing comment that will be reflected in the design, I think it was, or something to do with it. I also note that you say it's because of the smallness of it, but this is a significant piece of infrastructure. Can you explain to me your thinking as to why you've come to this point without any discussion with iwi?
Yep. So we're largely intending to undertake that as part of if there's any regional consenting requirements. We're broadly not going to require much in the way of that. The scale and nature is such that there's very limited environmental effects with regards to vision and strategy, and general sort of anticipated mana whenua consultation triggers or accepted consultation triggers. It's not that we're opposed to it. We have no opposition to consultation with mana whenua. We just have not seen any great driver for this in this instance at this stage. But yeah, we're not opposed to it. We would happily.
Just adding to that, a little bit more of my background. We do joint subdivisions with Tainui. So at the moment we're doing a joint subdivision at Rotokauri Rise between McDonald's, Lugtons and Tainui. We also did a joint subdivision with Tainui in Huntington. So I've had informal discussions with people at Tainui on that side of it, but they're simply been informal at this stage. So the people I deal with in Tainui with the other work that we do joint ventures with are certainly aware of what we're doing, but we haven't gone through the formal process at this point in time.
That's helpful, thank you. And just finally, I understand your thinking around the southbound exiting to a service station. Are you aware of any other service centres in the pipeline between Bombay and this site? And equally, how much do you rely on that as being the unique selling point, if you like, of the service centre?
To the first point, no, I'm unaware of anything being proposed on the for southbound traffic. Secondly, it's not critical from the perspective that there's a lot of places where service centres are sometimes relatively close together and further apart. What we really like at this point is it's further apart, so we think that more customers will come this way. However, if my expectation is there will be a service centre at some point between ours and probably Bombay, because a 75-kilometre stretch, it to my mind, there's probably an opportunity for someone else because of the size of the customer base. So no, we're not concerned about that. And certainly those people who have more experience, the tenants that we're talking to, that's their expectation as well. And they're not concerned, they're still very enthusiastic.
Thank you very much. I have no more questions.
Thank you. Mr. Fulton.
Yes, thank you. Just looking at its location, you have not mentioned benefit to the Hamilton City people that are going to be residents within that area and up to the motorway. Do you see that being a service centre that could be very much used by people off the likes of Webb Drive and over further onto Greenhill Road and its eventual development, which will, or that was it that area that's going into Hamilton City, is all that area just to the west of the service of the expressway, isn't it?
It's possible for them to come back through. It's not a convenient way to get back in there. And my thoughts are, is for people in the city, there's a much better development and things going on the Gordington Road, Wairiri. There's a whole commercial area there, which have a lot of amenity and that kind of thing. So to my mind, yes, people can travel back around there. We don't see that as our customer base. It's not convenient. We think they've got better options, but certainly people can do it. It's certainly not what we're aiming for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fulton. Mr. Marg?
Thank you for your proposal, Mr. McDonald. It's very clear your intent. The soil are not class 1 or 2, are they?
I'm sorry?
The classification of the soil isn't in 1 or 2, is it? It's a lower class soil.
I'd have to double check that. I thought it was good soils. I think it is good soil. We're farming it. We like farming it. So we're just double checking.
Yeah.
We think it's class 2.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. And tell me, from a tenant point of view, are we looking at McDonald's or a Burger King?
It's a little bit confidential, but in that ballpark, you're aiming in the right direction.
No, I have no other further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Gibb?
Thank you. I can see from a concept, I think it's page 2 or 3 of a concept plan, how the access into the service centre is. It's quite straightforward, but I'm just trying to work out how people get back on to the expressway. It seems a little bit convoluted, but can you explain that, please?
Yeah, for sure. The coming on is really straightforward, which is the primary focus of our ingress, to make sure it's really simple, really easy, which is at this stage, we're proposing a slip lane on the existing off-ramp. To go back on, it's actually quite straightforward if we had the right map up. You come out of the service centre, you turn left and drive approximately 100 metres, come back around and then back into the interchange. At this point in time.
Yeah, I've got that map that you're describing. I think it might be the next one down or the next one up, actually. Who's putting that on the screen right now? Is it the next one up? Yes, yeah. Is that one? Yeah, that one. Yes. And is that slip lane, would you say, big enough for trucks, etc.?
Oh, it has to be, absolutely. We see this as being quite a popular service centre for trucks, as I mentioned. Really awkward to get to service centres on the other side. So we've certainly got a lot of interest from the main fuel company that we're looking to use around the truck stop and its things. So absolutely, it's been designed with trucks in mind, and also providing truckers with a rest stop where they, it's welcoming for them is certainly part of what we're looking to do.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooney.
Yeah, you've got the initiative there, Mr. McDonald. But how much land's involved here?
4.5 hectares, approximately. 4.5 hectares.
4.5 hectares.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. you're not going to go anywhere, are you, unless you get the approval from Transit. It owns the motorway, it owns the expressway. If it says no, you can't do anything, can you?
No, it actually not quite that straightforward. What the no from Transit would mean is the slip lane that our initial proposal wouldn't be able to join in with Transit because we wouldn't have permission. And what that would mean is you would come down the off ramp into the roundabout at the interchange and come back to the service centre. So it changes our options when it comes to the access or the ingress to the service centre, rather than the ability for the service centre to go ahead.
Wouldn't that defeat the purpose though? So they would control the off ramp as well, wouldn't they?
They do, but they control so much. Correct, but we're still going through conversations with Transit. We're certainly well, continuing those conversations with Transit.
Yeah, but you're in negotiations about the purchase of the land, but they seem to sort of stymied you a bit on this proposal.
It's Transit. My understanding with other people I've talked with dealing with Transit is it can be difficult sometimes.
Okay. I raise these questions because if they are pretty staunch and they'd say no, and if we were to rezone this commercial, you'd be left with a spot commercial zone sitting there, and it may well not come to fruition. So I just raised the point whether an overlay in planning terms is a better proposal rather than a rezone.
Yeah, we've looked at both. We've looked at I think 2 to 3 options with regards to if Transit doesn't give us the approval, how we get the cars back to the service centre. From a commercial point of view, we still think it's a great location. There's all the positives, and we truly believe Transit needs a service centre somewhere for southbound traffic, which is why we're a little question as to why we're getting the roadblocks we are at the moment, so to speak. But there is a couple of options for to come off the off ramp to the roundabout and then make our way back into the service centre. There's a couple of options there which we're looking at, and for us it comes down to our tenants. They are also acutely aware of it must be easy and straightforward to get into the service centre. So the push really comes back to the clients we're talking to at the moment and what they're happy with, and so we're discussing those different options with them as well. It comes back to their commercial viability for them, and a big part of it is having a good ingress so that people can easily and comfortable get to the service centre, and that is certainly a large part of our focus.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's just I'm just really raising a planning issue rather than.
I'm well aware of that particular issue, and we're looking at alternatives if we eventually can't get Transit over the line.
All right.
Appreciate your.
Thanks, Mr. McDonald. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on that a little bit. First one is obviously you've done as you mentioned, a fairly extensive due diligence process in getting to this point.
Sure.
In terms, so you'll understand how other service centres operate and all those sorts of things.
Sure.
In terms of the ones that are on the expressway and on the Auckland motorway, I'm thinking of the one at Drury, the new one at, I'm not sure whether it's called Tuakau or Ngaruawahia, but the one I mean.
Yeah.
Who owns those, the actual land?
The one, as I understand it, in Taupori is a private landowner. They've done something very similar to what we're proposing on this. And again, they had the issues that they faced from the research I've done is very similar with Transit, I should say. It's very similar to the objections we're facing with Transit. So to my mind, it's a process of working through those and coming up with suitable solutions as they have done there.
Do NZTA themselves own any of these service centres?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. I think my final question is, and it's a planning / legal one, and it's the concept that this would be a controlled activity. Given that access is pretty fundamental to how this proposal would operate, and given that it would appear that NZTA haven't been entirely forthcoming, and given that you've accepted that there needs to be an integrated transport assessment undertaken as part of any consenting process. Doesn't that mean, though, that having a controlled activity makes most of that moot, insofar as if those assessments come back and find some sort of fundamental issue that needs to be addressed? There's no way that that consent application could then be declined. Wouldn't, if we were inclined to go down this route, wouldn't it be more appropriate to have something like a restricted discretionary activity classification, with the key issues being the matters over which discretion is reserved?
Sorry, if I may. I have considered those, and I don't think they're inappropriate. And
sorry, I don't think what's inappropriate?
I don't think using a restricted discretionary activity status
rather
than controlled would be inappropriate. I think it would, if it alleviates the panel's concerns, I think it's an appropriate solution to the situation. I think it still gives a reasonable indication that that activity is anticipated, and gives clear and provides both council and applicants and adjacent landowners a clear indication of what should be addressed within that application and overall proposal, and how it should respond to the site. So I think it would achieve appropriate outcomes still. Obviously not desirable from a consenting perspective, but it's still an appropriate outcome.
All right, thanks very much. I don't have any further questions. Is there anything else from the panel?
Yeah, just one, just on Ms. Mawson, my point about an overlay rather than rezoning this, because there's no certainty here because of transit. What's your view on that?
I think it's still appropriate, given that we have alternative access options available. That site has broad frontage to Greenhill Road, and we can obtain access via the off-ramp roundabout. So it's not like we're entirely, the slip lane option is our only access option. If that were the case, I think we'd be in a different position, and I would tend to agree that, yeah, it's a lot more tenuous link to seek rezoning and overlay. I think given that we've got the frontage to the expressway off-ramp and Greenhill Road, we have multiple options available to the development in terms of ensuring that the rezoning is it's not creating a spot zoning that has no end outcome.
Yeah.
And access arrangement. And I think, yeah, so I think, yeah, we've been investigating them because of the issues we've had. So it's not
something new.
Something we see as an untenable. It's something that we could overcome through alternative design solutions. Obviously not desirable, but still achievable and acceptable.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you. And I don't have any further questions either. I don't think any of the rest of the panel do. So thank you very much for your presentation. And that brings us to Bow Rock Properties Limited, please.
Thank you.
Good morning, thank you for having us here today. I'd just like to note that I've got Claudia Richardson, our graduate planner, in the room just observing today. And also we have Antanas from Pawa Architects, who's our landscape architect for this project, and our submitter, Jill Shasky, sitting there with Antanas in his office.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I please bring my highlights PowerPoint up, please?
Sorry, 1 second.
That's right, thank you. Just while Fletcher's sorting that out, can I please just check with the panel that you're familiar as to the background of this project, and I don't need to recover that?
Yeah, we are, but I think, Ms. Palmer, I think it's helpful for context just to briefly explain what it is without going into great detail, I think would be helpful.
No worries. Sorry, Fletcher, if you can just go back to that first slide there. Thank you. So this shows the property that my client, Ms. Chastity, owns. It's on Towhare Road. It's just outside of the existing country living zone, which you can see there in the background. That's Glen Ida Estate. If you flick to the next slide, that'd be great. So Borup Properties Limited are seeking to rezone approximately 20 hectares of land. So that's the red outline you can see there, from rural zoning to country living zone. It's just outside of Towhare Village, and it's to allow the subject site to be put to its best and highest use, and also to address issues that they're currently experiencing with the current rural zoning. And just noting that rezoning the subject site to country living would be a natural extension of the country living zone, which is presently on the eastern boundary of the site. I previously brought up in hearing 12 an amendment to policy 5.6.3, and that was around lot sizes in the country living zone and potentially allowing the flexibility to consider alternative subdivision design if you could demonstrate there was to be a retention of some productive use of the site in exchange for something a little bit smaller than the 5,000 square metres that has been put forward in the notified version of the plan. So some of the key issues that we're facing at the moment is that the ability to productively farm the site was lost between 1999 and 2007. The land was originally part of the block that is now Glen Ida Estate. Various subdivisions occurred under previous district plans, and what we've been left with is a parcel of land that's sandwiched between rural residential lifestyle living and of a size that we can't really productively do much with it. There is potentially high class soils on the site that would need to be confirmed by soil testing, but just looking at the mapping is showing that mostly classes 2 and classes 3, but access to those high class soils is restricted. So just on that, I note that Waikato Regional Council in their further submitted evidence state in reference to the high class soils and subdivision land use and development that policy 14.2 of the regional policy statement is key, and that this policy seeks to avoid a decline in the availability of high class soils for productive use. And our evidence that we've submitted has shown that productive use of the site is not economically viable, and therefore the availability of high class soils for productive use is questionable in my opinion. I think the key point of contention, which has been raised through the Section 42A Planners Report, appears to be whether the higher order strategic policy documents, namely the Regional Policy Statement, provides for the consideration of rezoning proposals outside of the future-proof settlement pattern, because I know it is, I note that it's not within the settlement pattern put forward in that document, and whether our proposal supports the strategic intent at that higher level. So this appears to be the key reason for the Section 42A officer recommending Borup's submission is rejected, and I note that the strict reliance on future-proof as an approach to rejecting rezoning proposals is somewhat flawed in my opinion. So in my opinion, future-proof is a strategic planning guidance document, and it is not intended to be used to draw clear lines in the sand in relation to zoning. As the document is high level, it must remain dynamic and responsive to future pressures and changes. And I note that future-proof itself actually acknowledges that there needs to be a flexible and responsive approach to managing growth. It's also my view that it cannot, nor is it actually intended to account for individual circumstances where rezoning would actually be pragmatic to give effect to the purpose of the RMO. So just on that note, I support similar arguments that have been made in rebuttal by the planners for Quigley Family Trust and also Diamond Creek Farms submitted 947 and 387, where they also raise the issue of the 42A officers' reliance on future-proof settlement patterns to reject rezoning proposals. Where are we up to? So my views on the strategic content of the relevant policy documents are set out in my rebuttal evidence, particularly from paragraphs 312 to 324, and that includes the integration of future-proof into the regional policy statement. I do think that flexibility is provided in the regional policy statement for consideration of rezoning outside of that settlement pattern. And I note that Waikato Regional Council in their further submission refer to being able to satisfy the criteria for alternative land release, which is set out in 6.14.3 of the regional policy statement. I note that we didn't explicitly address that alternate criteria in our evidence, but I believe that we have put forward sufficient evidence in our further 32AA evaluation and our other evidence submission for the panel to be satisfied that these criteria could be met. I particularly note that the Section 42A officer has concluded that BPL's proposal can generally meet the development principles set out in Section 6A of the regional policy statement, and that any effects can be mitigated through subdivision and land use consent processes, and that officer is generally happy with the proposal if the commissioners are of the mind to approve the rezoning. The Section 32A further evaluation supplied with my evidence has adequately demonstrated the suitability of the site for rezoning and concludes that rezoning to country living is appropriate in this context. And I just want to say that I acknowledge that there are a lot of factors to consider in weighing up the decision on whether to approve this proposal. However, I ask the panel to keep in mind when they are doing that there are no feasible land uses for which this site could be put to should the rural zoning remain. Thank you. I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Palmer. Let's start with you, Ms. Gibb, please.
I'd quite like it if we could have a wider picture on the screen, if Fletcher can put the map up. I want to have a look while that's happening, if it's happening. I want to have a look at what that area around the back side of the subject site is, and can someone just verify whether it's in different ownerships or in the same ownership? So the site in red, is that the owners of that, do they own the land around it?
Sorry, I just can't see the map there. Just wait till it's...
No, I don't own the land around. This is Jill Shasky for Bowrock speaking. I don't own the land around it, only the red.
Okay, and the land around it is obviously rural. Is it being farmed, the back pieces?
Yes. But not obviously not the green zone, and I think there's lifestyle blocks to the left of the red zone.
Okay, thanks very much.
Ms. Sedgwick.
Thank you. Can you just help me with the lot sizes? I note you talk about 20 to 30 residential lots of around 5,000, 6,000 square metres. What would be the size of what you call cluster of smaller lots?
So we did originally put forward an alternative proposal, which I think was based around the 1250 mark, but that was just purely indicative, and obviously that lot size would be determined by factors and for servicing like your on-site wastewater disposal and your 3 waters. So that would determine the final lot size. But the whole point of showing that alternative proposal was that if the policy amendment went through, it would give planners discretion to be able to consider that as a non-complying activity if you go below the 5,000 square metres, but you'd have that policy weighting behind it to retain some potential productive use of the site. And what we were envisaging for the site was being able to establish something like a community orchard or a community garden to service the subdivision.
Right, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Marg?
Nothing from me, but thank you very much.
Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, just the wetland area, or the area that's shown as in a lake position, is that, would that be intended to be maintained?
We'll put that forward to Antana Sal, landscape architect, for that question, if that's okay.
So I think I anticipate for that land to become part of land that's vested perhaps as a reserve or something like that, and there may be a management scheme for the whole of that development, depending on how it's developed, that will look after that. So it's wetland that's been developed over the last 10 years. It wasn't there 10 years ago.
No, that's right. And it's actually, it's been designed with the thought of developing a boardwalk through it. So that would be, would actually be sort of a wildlife park that people could use. Yes, probably the people who are involved at this stage, they may well continue to maintain it, even when it's developed, but that would be something that would have to be decided later on down the track.
Yeah, I suppose my experience of some of the stuff, they're easy to do in the development stage, and people are happy and enthusiastic, but give it 10 or 15 years down the track, the interest may not be there so much, and someone's going to be required to look after these pond areas. They don't look after themselves. So are you talking about having a covenant on all the properties to assist in the financial management of it or something like that? Is that how you intend to work it?
Yeah, that would be an option. Yeah, that I have thought about. That it could be, because it's already an attractive part of the site, and will only increase in attractiveness as it develops and grows. That the people living around it would probably be more than happy to pay a small amount to keep it maintained as it is an asset.
So it's a bit loose at the moment then, from what I'm hearing. There's nothing firmed up about what you would do with it, but there are some options you've thought about. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, the initial reasons for creating it were, just a desire to create space for wildlife and plant more trees. That was trying to do the right thing, as it were, and then sort of realising that makes it a more attractive place to live for prospective residents. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kearney.
Oh, could we have a Google map up just to get the context?
What was the address, sorry?
It doesn't have a road address, but if you put in Glen Ida Way, you're pretty close to it.
Can't you just take the, on that map, just take the layers off? There.
I was going to try to find an area, updated area one, but this will do.
Is that sufficient, Mr. Kearney?
Yeah. Okay. And has the Glen Ida estate, is that almost sold out, is it?
I believe it's fully developed, yes. Certainly it looked to be fully developed when I went on my site visit.
And so the land to your left there, that is rural there?
Correct, that is owned rural.
And are all those titles owned separately or by one person or what?
I couldn't comment on that, sorry.
Yeah, we're not aware either. I mean, it looks like they're separate titles, so there's a number of houses across the road and alongside to the west.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. I think that's pretty clear. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the morning session. I think others are all due later or have council or other folk. Let's just double check though whether, is the Dilworth Trust Board folk, are they here?
Yes, I'm here. Morning.
What do you think about progressing now, Mr. Arbuthnot, or would you prefer to wait till after lunch?
No, I'm good to go now.
Very good.
Right, is the panel happy with that?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, thanks, Mr. Arbuthnot.
Fantastic. So I've prepared evidence on behalf of Dilworth Trust Board. and it's in relation to the creation of some specific area provisions for their rural campus at Mangatawhiri. Now, we have discussed these at previous hearings, back at hearing 18, around that. And sort of by way of background, I suppose, in terms of the submission is seeking, it's acknowledging that certainly the notified objectives and policies of the plan don't support educational facilities in the rural zone. And certainly there are aspects of the rural campus, this boarding school that's established in the old Hotel de Van site, that might potentially conflict with some of those objectives and policies and the outcome of the plan as notified for the zone. So there was a bit of debate around this at hearing 18, where Mr. Cleese did make some amendments to objectives and policy frameworks to provide some clearer guidance to educational facilities. And I think of most note, there was the policy 5.3.9 was recommended, which seeks to enable activities that provide for rural communities' social, cultural, recreational needs, and that also included educational facilities. At the same time, during that hearing, it was also agreed that it was appropriate to apply specific area provisions to the rural campus. But what the evidence from council said was that in the event that scheduling was not to be pursued, they recommended a rule to provide for the maintenance, operation, alterations at the rural campus to be provided for as permitted activity, subject to alterations not increasing the net floor area. Now, from my perspective, that rule isn't really appropriate. It would result in even the most mundane development requiring a resource consent. And to my mind, it would be unnecessarily inefficient and onerous in terms of the management of future development at the site. So the point that I make in my evidence, I suppose, in terms of one of the points that I make in my evidence, I sort of tried to put it in this context in terms of how other educational facilities are provided for under the proposed plan, looking at state schools, for example, which are obviously managed by designations. And there are a number of those that actually apply within the rural zones. And those schools, such as Huntly College, is a good example in terms of a fairly large education facility in a rural zone, where it's subject to a designation, which obviously provides it for a flexible and efficient framework to respond to increases in population or role and what have you as well for that. Now, obviously, because Dilworth is an independent school, it can't get the benefit of a requiring authority status, and obviously can't rely on a designation to develop its facilities in the same way that other state schools can. And my take on this is that, look, independent schools do have an equally important role to play in terms of servicing the community. And it is also appropriate, in my opinion, to ensure that an enabling planning framework is put forward to ensure that they can provide for their ongoing efficient use and development. So that's the context I'm coming from. So, so from my perspective, I consider it good practice to include a tailor-made set of provisions for the rural campus itself. And I don't say, because we're dealing with an issue in terms of how an independent school can operate within a rural zone, I don't see it being as an issue in terms of other non-educational type out of zone activities, in terms of sort of opening up avenues for other people to seek similar provisions. So what my evidence does set out within attachment 1 is the provisions that I am seeking. The evidence that's come back from council, both in terms of the addendum and the rebuttal, the only point of disagreement that seems to be raised with the provisions that I've set forward was in relation to building coverage. And in this regard, where we're at with that is that a 10% building coverage standard be applied to the rural campus site itself. The concern that's been raised by council is that 10% is too much because of the extent of existing development on the site. So the issue that I've got, and as a consequence of that, we're in a situation whereby then any future development at the campus would require resource consent as restricted discretionary activity. And the reason because of that is that the current rules for the rural zone, as they've been recommended by council to date, is that the place is a 5,000 square metre site coverage control in the zone. Dilworth's existing development on the site is already sitting at 8,500 square metres. And so we're already in a situation where you know, that sort of a rule doesn't provide for any future development at the site. My take, and as I've set it out in my evidence and in my rebuttal evidence as well, is that 10% of the site area at Dilworth is appropriate, and it's appropriate having regard to the nature of the existing development that's been established on the site. Specifically, you know, the site's been used historically as Hotel Divan and doesn't display the same character as you would see for other large farming, intensive farming, or rural industrial activities that you would see within the area. Because now it's been taken over by the rural campus, it's now displaying very much a campus environment. So again, one, you know, you've got buildings that relate to each other, and very much, again, not a rural environment which is operating in. And then also added to that, you know, if you look at the manner and way in which state schools are able to intensify within their sites to respond to growth. And again, when you look at the actual fact that these specific area provisions are intended to consolidate development within its existing site boundaries, as opposed to enabling of having any unintended consequences of enabling other rural zone development from occurring. My mind is that the building coverage that's been sought is not problematic from that perspective. And certainly the approach doesn't seem to be any disagreement between myself and council in terms of how it sits with the wider objectives and policies and the outcomes of the regional policy statement, or even the direction of future proof. So very much seems to be, to my mind, sort of a disagreement as to whether or not it's appropriate to, in the first instance, provide for an independent school effectively as a permitted activity. And then secondly, if you are, whether or not a larger building coverage can be accommodated on the site. And that's, to my mind, just seems to be the 2 points of difference really where we're coming to on this. We haven't been able to resolve it through evidence. And so really where we're at is the provisions that I put forward in my evidence, my primary evidence, sort of haven't been changed since that stage. So look, that's sort of the top and the bottom of it. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any on it.
Thanks, Mr. Arbuthnot. I think most of this is pretty well trodden ground, as you mentioned, but let's see if we do have any questions. Mr. Marg?
No, nothing from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, no, I have no questions. Thank you.
Ms. Gibb?
Nothing, thank you.
Ms. Sedgwick?
No, nothing from me. Clear as usual, Mr. Arbuthnot.
Mr. Cooney?
Yeah, I think I'd like to lock you in the room with a planner, and you can bang your heads together and work out a solution to this. It just seems to me that you should be given some flexibility here. You're a charitable organisation. I suggest that we have a look at this from that perspective, and we'll come back to you about you and the planner getting together again.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Mr. Cooney. You must have ESP, because I was having a very similar thought. I think that would be helpful. I mean, we could, while we're all here, we could address this now, I think, in terms of the process going forward. We provide for the reporting planners to provide us with a reply statement once the hearing is finished, just to see whether they've changed their opinions on anything, and we don't set rigid timeframes for that. So I think all we would suggest is that yourself and Ms. Bolton liaise in the course of the next week or thereabouts, and when Ms. Bolton presents her reply statement, she can provide us with an update on where you've got. And all we'd ask her to do is to say if there is any, if there are different versions of what the provisions ought to be as at that time, that it's made clear to us what they are. That's if they've changed from what we've already heard. For example, if Mr. Arbuthnot says, well, actually, I know that's what my attachment 1 says, but having talked to you, I'm happy with Amendment X. Let's make us aware of what Amendment X is, even if it's not agreed. Does that sound like a plan?
Absolutely. More than happy to mediate on the provisions. It is something that's been missing generally from the process. Yeah.
Does that work for you, Ms. Bolton? Where's Ms. Bolton? I can't see her anyway because I've got my... Can we turn the slides off, please, Mr. Bell? Thank you. Oh, there she is. Found it.
I'm here now. Yes, I'm quite happy to, to liaise with Mr. Arbuthnot. So
that's great. All right.
I'd like to see you arrive at a workable solution.
Yep, agreed. And I think that sounds like a good plan. All right, that brings us, I think that's a sensible place to pause for lunch. 2 things before we do that though. There's a separate meeting request for this afternoon, so you'll need to log off from this one and re-log on when we resume at 1 o'clock. But if the panel wouldn't mind just waiting once everybody else is gone, there's just a couple of things to raise, please. So we're adjourned, thank you.